I hope you can all see my presentation and you can hear me. So welcome also from my side to this event. The aim of this presentation is to give you an overview of what you have to cover in the excellence section of your proposal and to present you some details with regards to the novelties and to provide you with some tips and tricks for writing this part of the proposal. It takes a little until it's not forwarding. I'm sorry for that. Oh, good. Now there's the next slide. So as we learned in the previous presentation, the proposal will have 3 sections. In the excellence section, you are expected to present the project's objectives and finally present the chosen methodology and how it progresses beyond the state of the art. So in other words, this is the place to define what your project is all about and what it aims to achieve. This message needs to be conveyed to the evaluators in a clear and exciting way. And then compared to Horizon 2020, social science and humanities, interdisciplinarity, open science and gender aspects are strengthened in the excellence part of the Horizon Europe template. And you will learn more about that in the course of this presentation. So there are 3 main rules to always keep in mind when writing the proposal. So these are also rules that you have to keep in mind for the other sections. So rule 1 tells you to fit to the topic criteria. So before starting to write, it is essential to know in detail the entire topic text published in the final version of the work program. So every word in there counts and all the details described in the topic text must be addressed with your project. Rule 2 says that you should follow the proposal template. So this template is an excellence guide in order to structure your proposal and to know what to cover in each section. Also, it provides some explanations on what it is meant with different terms. And then finally, addressing the evaluation criteria is rule 3. So it's highly crucial to know how your proposal will be evaluated. So therefore, know the evaluation criteria of each section of the proposal and address them entirely. So importantly, do not neglect any of the sub-criteria. It is very important to reach the highest score in all of the 3 parts. So this is how the proposal template looks like for the excellence part. And now in this presentation, I will guide you through this template and I will give you some more information. So first, let me also talk about the evaluation criteria for the excellence part. So there are some new changes. There are some changes compared to Horizon 2020. So the sub-criteria have been reduced. There will only be 2 sub-criteria for the excellence part. The open science practices will be assessed as a part of the scientific methodology. So open science practices will be evaluated and the gender dimension is integrated in the award criteria. And here we can see the evaluation criteria. So what will be evaluated is the clarity and pertinence of the project's objectives and the extent to which the proposed work is ambitious and goes beyond the state of the art. Also, the soundness of the proposed methodology, the appropriate consideration of the gender dimension research and innovation content, and the quality of open science practices, including sharing and management of research outputs and engagement of citizens, civil society, and end users will be evaluated. So there are certain aspects for the excellence section that are very important for a successful proposal. So first of all, the proposed project must be within the scope of a work program topic. And for that, of course, it's important to know the structure of a topic. So you always have a topic identifier and a topic title, and then the specific conditions are defined, such as the budget or the eligibility conditions. There will be 1 paragraph dedicated to the expected outcomes, which is important for the impact part. And then there is also a paragraph on the scope where the background is described and also it is explained what your project should explore, develop, or improve. And then within the excellence section, 1 key aspect is to demonstrate that your proposed project must be demonstrate that your idea is ambitious and goes beyond the state of the art. And also in the methodology, you must take into account the interdisciplinarity, gender dimension, and open science practices, and do not significant harm principle. You will learn more about that later in this presentation. So the proposal template actually tells you how to structure the chapter, the excellence section. So there will be 2 chapters. The first chapter will be about objectives and ambitions on up to 4 pages. And the second chapter will be about the methodology on up to 15 pages. Under objectives and ambition, you will describe the objectives of your proposed work. And here, when describing the objectives, it's very important to always be precise and give numbers. And in this subchapter, you will also describe how your project goes beyond the state of the art and the extent the proposed work is ambitious. Mikael will then, in her presentation, give you some more information on how to do this and explain that in your proposal. So in this subchapter, you also described where the proposed work is positioned in terms of research and innovation maturity, and you will provide an indication of the technology readiness level. So you will explain what is the starting point and what will be reached with your project. And with regards to the objectives, as they are very crucial, it's important to highlight the main objectives of your proposal in a clear way so that it's easy to find for evaluators. Also important for objectives is that the objectives need to be smart. That means when you describe your objectives, they have to be described in a specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and realistic and time-bound way. So that's very important to follow this SMART principle for all your objectives. And then in the methodology chapter, you will describe, of course, the overall methodology, which includes the concepts, the models, the assumptions, and also this part, it's very important, this part should be presented as a narrative. And then in this chapter, you also describe any national or international research and innovation activities whose results will feed into the project. So here it is important that you include links and synergies to other EU programs, but you should always highlight the added value of your project compared to those. And then integrating integrating interdisciplinarity is crucial, and you have to explain how your expertise and methods from different disciplines will be integrated and how you will use that in order to achieve your objectives. And then integration of social sciences and humanities is also becoming very essential. So you have to show the role of social sciences and humanities in the project, or you provide a justification if you consider that these disciplines are not relevant. For integration of SSH, I recommend to have a look at the fact sheet on good SSH integration practices. And then the gender dimension must be addressed more consistently now in Horizon Europe by integrating it into the research and innovation activities of the project. About that, you will also learn more later in the presentation by Mikael. And in this subchapter, we'll also describe how appropriate open science practices are implemented as integral part of the proposed methodology. And all applicants generating data and other research outputs must explain how the outputs will be managed in line with the FAIR principle, and this is also done in this chapter. So you have already heard these 3 terms, and they will play a crucial role in the excellence section. So open science practices will be very important, the do no significant harm principle, and the gender dimension in research and innovation content. With the next slides, I will cover the open science practices and do no significant harm principle, and then Mikael will present more information about the gender dimension and how to included in your methodology. So let's start with the open science practices. So open science is a way of how to perform research, and it's crucial for all Horizon Europe projects. It will now be included in the excellence section of the project. So in your proposal, you have to describe how you integrate open science practices in the methodology, and this has to be done on up to 1 page. So the definition of open science in the Horizon Europe regulation is that open science means an approach to the scientific process based on open cooperative work, tools, and diffusing knowledge. There are various open science practices, such as early and open sharing of research, research output management, or involving all relevant knowledge actors, including citizens, civil society, and end users in the co-creation, for example, through citizen science. So some of these practices are mandatory, such as providing open access to scientific publications and to implement research data management following the FAIR principles. Some are recommended, such as, for example, the participation in open peer review. To know about the mandatory and the recommended practices of open science, I recommend to also consult the model grant agreement, where you will find more details. And then, as already mentioned, the FAIR principle is very important. So beneficiary must manage the digital research data generated in the action responsibly in line with the FAIR principle. FAIR means findable, so make it easy to find the data and the description. Accessible, make every effort to ensure data availability while limiting unnecessary obstacles. Interoperable, so adopt data formats that make subsequent cross-referencing possible. And reusable, so facilitate the work of users by providing as much information as possible on the origin of the data and their potential limits. And data sharing should be subject to the principle as open as possible, as closed as necessary. So in case of the need to protect the data, you have to argue why the data needs to be closed, and you have to make a good case. So up to 1 page should be dedicated to describe the research data output management. And then this is a new principle that you have to also include in your methodology. So applicants will have to consider the environmental impact of the projects. Therefore, the do no significant harm principle should be taken into consideration for the project methodology, as well as when it comes to project outcomes and impacts. So the 6 environmental objectives to which no harm should be done are shown here. One example for it is climate change mitigation, and there are also others. So if a negative impact is expected, applicants will have to explain how it could be managed. So such a project can still receive funding, but only if those negative impacts are duly considered and there is a solid management plan that describes solutions on how to limit them, and if the positive impacts in other areas outweigh the negative ones. So that's very important. So the do no significant harm principle needs to be taken into consideration in the scientific methodology and in the impact of the project. With this, I come to the end of my presentation, and I will now hand over to Nicole. She will give some more information about specific parts of the excellence section.
Thank you, Linda. Can you quickly unshare?
Yeah.
Thanks. So yes, I will provide you now with some additional tips for the 2 parts of the excellence, to the 2 chapters to the excellence section. Starting first of all with section 1.1 objective and ambition regarding the state of the art. So as Linda mentioned, the purpose of explaining the state of the art is to explain in your proposal how the expected outcome of the project goes beyond the current innovations and scientific or technical qualities available out there. How can you do that? Well, there are several ways, and we recommend you to make screens through existing publication landscape, for example, project landscape, for example, using the Cordis database, or examining existing scientific literature or search in patent database. This also allows you to make sure that what you are planning to do in your project is done according to the freedom to operate principles, so that you are not breaching any third party rights. Regarding gender dimension, instead, also as Linda mentioned, we are not talking about the gender balance in the team carrying out the project, rather in explaining how the gender dimension is integrated in your planned research and innovation activities. This is mandatory, and in case of same rating of more proposal, the gender dimension will play the crucial role in deciding which of the projects will be chosen. Remember, for gender dimension in research and innovation, you need to take into consideration three main aspects. So one is sex, so the biological characteristic distinguishing between male, females, and intersex. Gender, which is a socio-cultural norm defining feminine and masculine, which changes over time and over territory. And finally, do not forget to also include intersectional factors, which are any other factors such as racial or ethnic origin, age, disability, etc., which together with the sex and gender may lead to additional discrimination. It is also important to try to avoid any common mistake. Here is a list of them, especially, for example, using gender stereotypes, or using, for example, sex or and gender as synonymous, which are not, or again, not considering other categories or possible influence, so the so-called intersectionality, as we mentioned earlier. Finally, here's some additional comments on the open science side for the part of methodology. Remember, open science refers to the fact that you can make sharing of your research in a way that is open and as early as possible. Open access to research output through the position in trusted repositories. A research output management, including research data management. We will see later what that means. Participation in open peer review. Measures to ensure reproducibility of research outputs. And finally, involving all the relevant knowledge actors in the co-creation of research and innovation agenda, the so-called citizen science, for example. Regarding open access, so the publication of peer-reviewed scientific articles, in order to be eligible to cover the fees and having them reimbursed by the European Commission, you must publish in open access, in fully open access journals. Articles must be deposited in a trusted repository at the latest upon publication under the license CC BY or CC BY NC, CC BY ND for long text formats. Be aware that now the European Commission also has created this new platform, the Open Research Europe, where you can also include your publications in an open access way. The platform is completely free of charge, so it's not compulsory for your project to be included as a place where to deposit your articles, but however, it can be a good point for you to include it in your project. Then remember, information via the repository about research output tools and instruments need to validate the conclusion of the scientific publication. And finally, for metadata, also in this case, need to be published in open access within the FAIR principles as mentioned by Linda, under the license CC0 or equivalent. Finally, what does research data management mean? So you are responsible to create a research data management for any research data generated in the project, always in line with the FAIR principle. First of all, you will need to produce a data management plan, which needs to be regularly updated during your project and should be submitted by month 6 of your project, unless there are certain type of different clauses inside the call you're applying for, especially for public emergency calls, where the data management plan needs to be provided at the proposal or at latest by the grant agreement signature. Be aware that there is also now a data management plan template available on the funding and tender. The deposit of the data needs to be done as soon as possible and according to the deadlines you place in your data management plan. And of course, as open as possible, but also as closed as necessary. Entrusted the repository under the license CC BY or CC0, also for metadata. And finally, the research data management allows you to make your data reusable. So you need to provide information via repository about any research output, tool, instrument needed to reuse or validate the data. And with this, I am also arriving at the end of this part. And if any questions came up, we are ready to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikkel. Thank you, Linda. Indeed, there are questions were flowing, so some of them have been answered through the presentation, but there are a number of them now coming in. So I will start maybe with one on concerning open data. So one participant is asking, what does participation in open peer review means? Consider publishing in journal with open peer review. Can you just complement that?
Yes, I can take this question. So actually the question has already been answered by the participant. So yes, indeed, it means to consider publishing in journals with open peer review. And there are several journals that offer that. Okay,
thank you very much. Then the do no significant harm principles raised a number of questions. So I go through the first one. So regarding the do no significant harm principle, are there exceptions for some topics where some harm is unavoidable? Can you please give an example for such a case study, if possible, just to understand better the rationale? Who wants to take that one?
I can maybe start and then Mikkel can add to my answer. So, so I cannot provide a case study as this is actually a new principle. I'm sorry for that. However, as mentioned, it can be that some harm is unavoidable. So negative impacts can be part of your project to these points that I mentioned in my presentation. However, I also mentioned that if the positive impacts outweigh the negative impacts, that's one point that is very important. And that you also have to show that you have a solid management plan that describes solutions on how to limit them. So that shows that you're aware of the negative impacts, but that the positive impacts are overweighing the negative impacts, and that you show that you know how to manage and limit them. That's important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mikkel, you want to complement?
Well, maybe just a little thing. The principle and the 6 thematics are not necessarily mandatory. So in the sense that for some calls, they will be mandatory to be addressed, in other cases, not. So if some some harm is unavoidable, doesn't mean that you will be excluded or evaluated necessarily negatively for your project. The important thing is to address the fact that you are aware that there is such harm. So it's important at least to mention that yes, we know that there is this harm. We are aware about it. We do the best that we can, but it can be that in certain situations you can really not avoid it. But it's important that you address it and you explain it.
Okay, thank you very much. And then another follow-up question on that, what is seen as a negative impact regarding the do no harm principle? Are there criteria listed?
As far as I know, there are no criteria defined for that. So that's really entirely up to you to explain the negative impact for these thematic points.
Okay, thank you. Nicole, compliment? No?
Yes, maybe. Well, the negative impacts are, of course, in the on the six thematics addressed in the do not harm principle. So are those 6 ones, I guess. And yeah, but how to judge if it's negative or not, I guess, is up to the people writing the.
Okay, thank you for that. I take a last question on, and then for the rest we will move them for the later session on the Q&A session about the open access to publication. So there is one question: there is no embargo period anymore in Horizon Europe? Question mark. Will we have a new DMP template for Horizon Europe? So a new data management plan template. Is there anything new planned there, Nicole?
So the data management plan template is available already in the funding and tender portal.
Okay.
So yes, I think that answers the question.
Yeah, that's actually there were 2 questions, and then there was one question on the embargo period. But indeed,
yes,
there is
correct.
no embargo period, so you're not allowed to. So you can publish in a journal with embargo period, but you will not. Your costs will not be covered. So the European Commission covers the costs of publication only on journals where there is no embargo period. Good. I think we move on.